Hey everyone, and welcome to the Odank School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you for joining me today. I'm glad you're here, and I appreciate you spending some time with me. We're doing today is Q&A for February 2020. Um, so let's get started. I've actually recorded this video before, but there were so many technical problems with it, I just decided to abandon it and record it all over again. The way it's supposed to work and the way I try and do it is I don't really look at the questions too much beforehand, other than just to kind of check and make sure everything's family friendly. We haven't really had any problems with people swearing or whatever, so it's been fine. However, because the way it's supposed to work is the mysteries are meant to be taught orally, and with live students sitting in front of you. However, this format is a bit different, and so I try and stay as close to the spirit of the way that the mysteries are meant to be taught as closely as possible. However, that doesn't always work out the way it's supposed to. So, by not really looking at the questions beforehand, it kind of replicates as best as I could someone just asking me it in person, and me as the person sitting in the teaching seat, has to be able to answer it. Just due to circumstances, that didn't really work out that way this time. So, I already know what's coming because I already recorded this before. So just kind of keep that in mind. But it's good. This is a good learning process. Like I always preach over and over again, chaos is a creative principle. If you try to avoid chaos, you never get to actually grow. Nothing new ever gets to be birthed, and so it's worth embracing it. We're really kind of facing that in real life in our family right now. There's a distinct possibility we might lose our apartment, and if that happens, because we've been struggling to make some rent and stuff, and so if that happens and we have to move, I'll of course let you all know, but there might be some time in there where I'm not able to upload just because we're in transition. So I'll let you know how all that goes. But yeah, again, if you're afraid of the chaos, nothing new is ever going to get to come out of it. So if you just embrace the chaos and say, this is just the birthing pains for something brand new and exciting, then it's a lot more exciting. And you don't, and fear is, it's called a negative creative principle. And if you embrace the spirit of fear, like ego, like an out of control ego, it shrinks you down. It makes it so you don't really get to expand. And so if you're not really afraid, you just embrace it with love and saying, okay, Mother Mystery is giving birth to something. Let's love what is going to be birthed rather than afraid of the pain of getting there. Then good stuff comes. And so just kind of keep that in mind. And that was a brief little preaching session, I guess, before we actually get started. Only one person asked something this time around. Her name is Alex. And let's see what Alex has to say here. Let's get it open. So she actually asks 3 questions. And the first one, I actually feel like I answer pretty adequately without really realizing it in my last video. The not the last video about the season of sacrifice, but the actual the last full length one about the ego and I use the analogy of the boat and how you're sitting in the boat and the ego is the boat and the mind is the rudder. We talked about all of that. That was my last real video, I would say. This one is, I feel like this first question, I feel like I already answered pretty well with that. But I'm going to read all of them anyway, and then we're actually going to just start with number 2 because I don't want to pay for the same real estate twice, if that makes sense. All right. Let's see here. So number 1, the first question that I feel like I answered before was, you mentioned that we have many different personalities within us. Would it be fair to assume that it's the soul personality trying to fuse with the ego? And when the two meet, that's when the magic happens? Second question. The fact that the sacred feminine was erased from the Bible and the brutal control of women, and she says, like the burning of witches, forcing women to cover up, hide their hair, the tireless onslaught of modern media to make women feel inferior by telling them they have to look a certain way. Are these two connected? If so, what's the purpose? To keep people unbalanced so they're easier to control? And then the third question is, what is your favorite symbol and your favorite myth and why? Thank you. Really looking forward to more videos. Alex. Thank you, Alex. Those are really good questions. So again, I'm not going to really talk much about the first one, simply because I feel like I've already kind of tackled that in the last video. I will say, though, that we do have different personalities within us. In fact, you could almost say that the gods and their shenanigans are all representations of different personality types that exists within everybody. You are a pantheon of personalities that exists inside of you, and you move between these personalities quite a bit, from war to maternal to kingship to wisdom, back to maternal, then back to war again. I mean, all of these exists within you, and if you want to dig down deep into who you are and all those kinds of mechanics, it's good to kind of realize that you actually have a lot of different things going on inside of you, way more than you think. You're not just one personality, you're actually a universe of personalities. And so it's important to kind of realize that. It was a while ago. It was a while ago now, but when I first kind of realized this, I was an only child, and so I had a really active imagination. And so one of the things I used to do before sleep is I would have these daydream stories that I would play in my head, so that and I would just play on those play the daydream stories until I actually drifted off. And I'd always have these different figures that I would bounce between, and I was always really frustrated because it's like, because I could relate it to all of them, and I always wanted to be all of them, but they're always separate. So like I had a hunter. There was a guy who was kind of a hunter type of person who went on hunts. There was a person who I called the paladin, who was kind of this, I don't even know how you describe him. He was like a kind of a kingship type character. He had a big castle, and he lived in this big castle. I always liked medieval stuff anyway, so that's probably no surprise. Like, I have swords and stuff up on my wall. There was a girl who was kind of a mage type person. She would kind of a classical like fantasy mage, and then there's a child that was in there, and there's a bunch of these little characters that there's a warrior. They're all very much archetypal in who they are. And like, I remember even as much younger, I was really struggling with games like, I used to be a really big gamer, like World of Warcraft and that kind of stuff. And I'd always struggle. I can never stick with any one character because I related to all of them. And it wasn't until I really started delving into the mysteries that I realized that the reason I couldn't stick with one character, and the reason I was always so frustrated by picking one, is because actually all of them were me. They're all just different facets of my personality. And when I realized that, it was like, oh, that makes total sense. I had no idea. But that's just an example of what I mean. That you're an entire pantheon of people. Um, so good question, Alex. I'm if you want to know the more about the ego and that kind of stuff, you could go back to that earlier video. All right. So question number 2: the fact that the sacred feminine was erased from the Bible, and the brutal control of women, burning witches, forcing women to cover up, hide their hair, the tireless onslaught of modern media to make women feel in fear by telling them that they have to look a certain way. Are these two connected? If so, what's the purpose? To keep people unbalanced so they're easy to control? This is a complicated question. And there's a lot of ways we can go with this. I'm someone, and I'm going to make this disclaimer just because this is the internet and I know the way the internet works. All right. I'm someone who's interested in finding the truth of something. I'm not necessarily as interested in political correctness. And so ours is religion, like Helena Blavatsky said, HPB. Man, I can't talk today. Holy crap. I'm so sorry. She said that the only real religion is truth. And I totally agree with that. And so it's important that we kind of come to it from this context, because I'm interested in teaching the truth. I'm not interested in I don't know. I don't want to offend anyone. That's not my purpose. But I want to be very specific, and I want to let you know that this is coming from a place of honesty and truth telling. All right. You don't get to leave the underworld unscathed. You don't. It doesn't matter who you are, what's race, sex, religion, any of that. It doesn't matter. You're always going to suffer in the underworld. And if you don't suffer one way, you're going to suffer a different way. And so if you're a man, you're 100 times more likely to die in a war. You're like something like 85% more likely to commit suicide. You're like 85% more likely to die in a workplace accident. You are, if you're rich, a lot of studies have come out now that suicide among the rich are 1,000 times. I'm being hyperbolic here, but it's like a very large number of times more likely to commit suicide than you are if you're poor. And so there isn't really a way to get out of this without being unscathed. So I don't necessarily think that it's just women aren't necessarily being the ones who are picked on here. I mean, I don't know anyone. Honestly, I'm trying to think of someone I know in my personal life who looks like any of the male Avengers in their physique, right? I actually, that's not true. I know Jacob Israel, and he looks pretty sexy. He's pretty jacked. But beyond that, everyone is made to feel ashamed about the way they look. Everyone is made to feel inadequate, and everyone is. And this is the part that I do agree with Alex's assessment on, is we know that everyone's going to suffer. We know that everyone's going to hurt and everyone's going to have problems. But what people do to definitely keep people unbalanced, definitely take those cracks and just expand them out so that it feels like there's these huge gaps, is they'll emphasize your problems and then demonize the other person. And so, you have the men's rights activists fighting against the feminists. for example. Why do we even need to have that argument? Right? Why is that even an argument? Does not everyone deserve rights? Right? Just because a woman suffers a certain way doesn't mean a man doesn't suffer. They may not suffer in the exact same way, but it doesn't mean that they don't suffer. And the media does very much take those kinds of issues and start pulling them apart and saying, look at you, you're suffering. It's this other person's fault. This person over here, that person, it's their fault, the reason you're suffering. And that's not true. That's not true. You're going to get beat up here. This is the underworld. This is the place of the wailing and gnashing of teeth. It's not going to be a pleasant experience. It's not anyone's fault. And if anything, it's probably your own ignorance that's doing it. But like I said, there's a lot to unpack here. So there is, so the second part of the question was really, she was asking about the sacred feminine and the Bible and the brutal control over women. And that is definitely true. There's actually two sets of mystery schools. You have the old one and you have the new one. The old one is early Kingdom Egypt, and it's like pre-pharaonic and early Kingdom Egypt. Still, a lot of this kind of still exists in India. Kind of the Mesoamerican, Central American, the Native American cultures. The Nordic systems, the Celtic systems. These were the old systems. And they believed in extreme equality for the most part between men and women. I don't let the media give you wrong information. Right. Of course there's some nuance in there. It's not going to be perfect all the way across. But like in Egypt, for example, if you wanted to be a woman in ancient times, being a woman in Egypt was probably the best place to live, because they had extreme equality between the two. Women could have divorce rights, they have property rights, they have the right to vote, they have all the rights, plus even maybe a little bit more higher standard than men. And that is because everything had esoteric value to it. Even the dinner forks had an esoteric, sacred, religious reason for the way they were designed. Everything was based on mental principles. So if you have a man, for example, who gets raised to a very high station, he wears a woman's wig. So, and that's because of the birth-giving aspect of the sacred feminine, right? They're both equally important, but the mechanics that go along with the sacred feminine is a little bit more, she does a little bit more than what the sacred masculine does. And that's just because of the life-giving properties that she has. And that's very, very important to kind of keep in mind. And so, but it wasn't until a little bit later we started to kind of see this around the mid-kingdom Egypt that started popping up with the advent of like the Amun priesthood and some of these others, when in the early kingdom Egypt, the god was Atum, Atum, and he had his grandchildren. Is it his grandchildren or his great-grandchildren? I think it was his great-grandchildren, which was Osiris, Isis, Set, and Horus was sometimes in there, but I can't remember the other one. Who was the other one? I don't remember. Anyway, he had 4 great-grandchildren. And he was the primary deity. And then his children kind of ruled under him. And then he leaves, and then leaves everything in the the care of Osiris, and things are pretty good under Osiris. But eventually, Osiris is murdered, and then a new set of gods come in, and then that's where we have the advent of Ra, and then later on you have Amun Ra, where you have Ra, the supreme deity, and then you have Amun, who kind of takes on Ra's title as a means of establishing his own dominance. And when that happens, like with the Amun priesthood, they're very patriarchal. The tendency, so if you're looking at it from a spiritual perspective, if we're looking at metaphysics, the sacred feminine has slightly more power than the sacred masculine, because, like I said, of the creative the creative power that the sacred feminine has. The sacred masculine is just a calculator who is nothing but reason. The sacred feminine is something that actually creates things that are brand new and puts them out into the world, and that is a really big deal. But when you are completely unconscious, right, and you're living in the underworld, and you don't have a metaphysical, spiritual, or even any understanding of natural law, it is extremely easy for the sacred masculine to run roughshod over everything else, because the sacred masculine has because it's not attached to the emotional side of the sacred feminine. All it is reason, and it's really what it is. It's emotionalist reason. And so it's very easy for that to become dominant, because you're not really going to think about the feelings of other people. You're not really going to think about the consequences of what you're doing. It's all just calculating the numbers, right? Why am I going to waste time talking to a neighbor when I could just kill them and then take their money? And so if you live in an unconscious society, the sacred masculine naturally becomes the dominant force. Just by the very sake of its nature. And so it's, which is why you have to have a sacred feminine to balance out that sacred masculine. They have to be together, right? They always have to be married to each other. Otherwise, whenever you have too much of something, it is always harmful. Too much water, you die. Just enough water, it makes you live, right? Too much hydrogen, you die. Too much oxygen you could have problems if you have too much oxygen. But if you have hydrogen and oxygen put together, then you have air, and it's fine. You have to have those two things that keep balance with each other. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. So, when you live in an unconscious society, that patriarchal thing starts to creep up and get too powerful, and that's really what we see. It's funny she mentioned forcing women to cover their hair. I thought this is kind of just a neat little aside. I was recently listening to someone talking about the story of Enoch, and more specifically, he was talking about New Testament writers referencing the book of Enoch, because back in the time of Jesus, in the time of the New Testament writers, in the time of the Bible, the book of Enoch was a really popular book. Everyone read it. And, like there's this throwaway line in Paul that says women need to cover their hair as to not tempt the angels. And that was a direct reference to the book of Enoch, when the sons of God, the angels, saw women and came down and had sex with them, and then it caused a whole bunch of problems. But what I didn't know, and what he said, what I thought was really fascinating, is that they have discovered some Roman medical dictionaries. And what was fascinating about that is that in the medical dictionaries, they believed that a woman's hair was responsible for sucking the semen up into the uterus during sex, to help get her pregnant. So I don't know why they say this about women and not for men, but they believed that a woman's hair is essentially the same thing as their genitals. And so if you don't have the hair covered, it's the same thing as like not putting pants on. It's a weird belief. I don't know if it's true or not, but if it's true, that actually makes a little bit of... it's not logical based on where we're sitting today, but I guess that would be a logical leap if you're dealing with that kind of logic. I'm not making a true statement here. I just thought it was an interesting little piece of information that I didn't know. But yeah, the purpose of the exploitation of these things, the purposes of the exploitation of the vulnerabilities of men, the exploitation of the vulnerabilities of women, are definitely, to put it in Alex's words, are definitely used to put people unbalanced, to keep people unbalanced. If you're always thinking that everything is somebody else's fault, if you're always thinking that you're the victim, it puts you in a fight or flight mentality. And just like I said before we got started, if you have that spirit of fear, nothing can grow. Nothing can grow. Love is the thing that makes things grow. If you love the process of birth, good things come out the end of it. If you're afraid of the process of birth, bad things come at the end of it. Well, it makes it so you don't... what's the word? You're not going to love the thing that's born out of it. Right. So like I said, we might get kicked out of our house, our apartment. If I'm afraid of the process and if I'm afraid of the chaos, then if I have to move out and move to a different town, then I would think, oh gosh, I just lost my house. Oh, it's the worst. I had to move out of town. When really, I wanted to move out of town anyway. And instead of hating the fact I lost my house, I could love the fact that the gods provided me a way to get out. You see what I'm saying? It's something like that. If you understand that the purpose of the underworld is a birthing process, the earth is called a mother for a very specific reason. You understand? If you go into this expecting that life is supposed to be easy and then complaining that it's hard, you're always going to have problems. If you go into it expecting that life is actually meant to be hard, that this place is meant to be not easy, then when good things do happen to you, you are profoundly you're profoundly conscious of your blessings. Right. Life is hard. Look at the fact that I have food to eat. Look at the fact that I have a roof over my head and I am sheltered from the elements. Because I could definitely just as easily not have food to eat. I could definitely not have shelter from the elements. And a lot of people don't have those things. And so it's all in the way you look at it. It's all in the way you look at it. And she also mentioned forcing women to look a certain way, the burning of witches. Now, a lot of that is yes, to keep people unbalanced, but a lot of that is just the fact that sex sells. We live in a capitalist society. You want it to get people to spend money. And so therefore, advertising really is a race to the bottom of the brainstem. If you're dealing with an unconscious population who doesn't know what's going on, who are easily exploited, all you have to do is trigger them in some way, and they'll do exactly what you want them to do. So that's why beer commercials always feature half-naked women. That's why superhero movies show buff, like Captain America, for example. This is this beefy hunk guy. That's why the women are always beautiful. And it's for that very reason. It's for that very reason. It's to trigger that subconscious fight or flight animal instinct way down at the base of your brainstem that sees that and responds to it and goes, oh, I'm slightly horny. I feel really good. You get that endorphin rush by that looking at someone beautiful, and you want more of that, and it gets you to buy the product. It's really that simple. Again, and that's something that happens within an unconscious society that doesn't know what's going on, and that's why you have a patriarchal problem, right? It's getting better. It is getting better, but that is why we have a patriarchal problem. And it's because an unconscious society, the sacred masculine becomes the dominant gender, symbolically speaking. There's plenty of women who are sacred masculine dominant. Plenty of women who are sacred masculine dominant. It's not a matter of physical gender. We're talking about mental gender here. Okay, there is definitely a difference. Let's see. And then I think I answered that one pretty well. I know it kind of seems like I'm kind of bouncing around a little bit, but with complicated questions, there's a lot to kind of unpack. And I know that the answer wasn't particularly politically correct, but if we're interested in getting to the truth, I think that is as close to the truth as I understand it. What's your favorite symbol and what's your favorite myth and why? This is a really tough one because I love myth. So the way I was taught the mysteries is not the way a lot of people introduced to them. So like I wasn't, I'm not going to say this was I'm not going to say that I wasn't allowed to read any of these things, but for the most part, I was really only given myths to read. So, let's see here. I'm going to switch over here so I can make sure I can see what I'm doing. All right. Like this one, Norse mythology. If you haven't read it, read it. Like books on mythology. Lots of books on mythology. Right? Celtic Myths and Legends. Good book. Lots and lots of books on mythology. I don't have actually as many as I used to. Let's see here. Another one. Myths every child should know. It's a good one. I must have moved some of these. Oh, here we go. Another really good one. Through the Fairy Glass. Written by a man who... It's not a scholarly book. It's written by someone who actually believes in fairies. It's a scholarly book by someone who actually believes in the content, which is kind of cool. Normally, we only get that like through like traditional religious content, but yeah, like so a lot of I don't have as many up here as I used to, but so like there was the books that I was supposed to read, and then there was like the YouTube channels such as History of Mythology Explained, and some of these others. I'll actually link a few of them below if I remember. And you know, all they talk about is myth and mythological stories and that kind of stuff. And that's the way I learned the mysteries. Is my teacher would say, here are some myths, read the crap out of them. And then I would have to do some exercises. If you're one of my students, or you heard me talk about this before on the channel, there's a lot of little exercises that you have to do all the time to get your mind balanced, to kind of build up those. So you have a balanced sacred masculine and a sacred feminine, right? You do exercises to make those things happen. Some of it is meditation, some of it is you know, just crunching numbers to build up sacred masculine, or sometimes it's art to build up sacred feminine, and there's this fun thing. There's things you can do to kind of make that happen. but a lot of it was through myth. And it wasn't until like a little bit later on that I was given like what you say classic esoteric authors. Like you have this guy, Eliphas Levi is a really big one, and you have Manly Hall. He is a big one, right? And then you have some of the new guard, like such as Manly Hall. I'm sorry, not Manly Hall. Mark Passio was a big one and was a huge influence on my life. And I'm just going to completely lose his name. What is his name? It's going to bug me. I'll put it down here so I can find it. Jordan Maxwell. That's what it was. Jordan Maxwell. He's still alive, I think. But there are kind of some of the new guard that's kind of come out and started teaching this stuff. But it wasn't until well into the process that I was allowed to even look at that stuff. And because the job is to look at the myth and say, what is this trying to say? What is this myth trying to say? So my favorite myths, I'm always a big fan of the Dying God myth. And of course I'm super biased. That's partly one of the reasons I fell so head over heels for the mysteries in general. I really like the ones that are Dying God myths that you don't realize are Dying God myths. Such as the I'm gonna lose his name again. Wonder why I'm having so many brain farts. Let's see. He's the guy who killed the Minotaur. It's not Perseus, but it sounds like Perseus. Let's take a look. Let's see. Who killed the Minotaur? His name was Theseus. That's right. Theseus. I love the story of Theseus and the story of how to kill the Minotaur because it's a Dying God myth, but it doesn't look like a Dying God myth on the surface. You have this beast who lives inside this labyrinth, which is a maze. Labyrinths are known spiritual tools, consciousness tools. They're placed all over the world. Every continent has one, especially in Northern Europe. They're everywhere. And so this isn't really a new idea. It wasn't invented in the story. It was well established from beyond time. The concept of labyrinth. And it represents the underworld. And so just like the Dying God myth of Odin, he ties a rope around himself so he could find his way back out again, which is a symbol of dangling yourself into the underworld by a thread. And he goes into the underworld to conquer death. It's the story of Jesus. There's actually a whole set of you have Dying God myths as an umbrella, and then there's various subgenres, and the Hanged God is a subgenre. So you have Jesus, Odin, Perseus, Theseus, Quetzalcoatl, just to name a few. They were called the Hanged Gods. They were the ones that were dangled into the underworld and tortured in the underworld. And so you have this beast that lives in the underworld that's killing people. Right? People wander into the labyrinth and get lost, and this beast that lives inside the center of the labyrinth is killing people. This horned, half man, half bull thing. And so Theseus, the Dying God, descends into death, descends into the underworld, conquers death, conquers the thing that is torturing and harming people in the underworld, and he leaves via his thread. Same symbolism as in the Odinic mystery with Odin dangling from the tree. Same symbolism is Perseus, who is tied to a mountain. I mean, it just goes on and on and on and on. You read enough of these, you start seeing you start seeing similar themes over and over again, especially if you know what you're looking at. Another one of my favorites actually is I really liked the meat of poetry in Norse mythology. I really, really like the story of the master builder in Norse mythology. I like that one in particular because it is very similar, extremely similar, to the Hiram Abiff myth in the Masonic the Masonic tradition. This is a good book. If you haven't had a chance to read it, if you're interested in Freemasonry, the Lexicon of Freemasonry, and then we also have, just in case you're interested, The Craft and Its Symbols is another really good one. Pulling everything off my bookshelf today, apparently. So those are a couple of my favorites. Of course, my all-time favorite is the Norse Odinic dying god myth. Just because of the profundity of the symbolism in there is just about infinite. And so those are some of my favorites. One of my favorite symbols, of course, if you haven't guessed, is probably either the noose or the spear Gungnir, just because it has such good, particularly the spear of Gungnir, just because it has such real world application to use to a lot of the Mystery School concepts get really heady, and you have to be pretty advanced before you even really know how to use them. It's a little bit like learning how to play the harp. I had a guitar teacher once who was also a harpist. Actually, playing the harp was her main instrument. And she said that she liked teaching the guitar because you learn 3 chords and you could play half the rock songs on the planet. But with the harp, there's so much experience you have to learn before you can even play anything that most people quit. And with a lot of the Mystery School stuff, it's kind of that way, right? You learn all this philosophy and all this symbolism and all this stuff, and it's not even until you're practically done before you even know how to do anything with it. With the Spear of Gungnir is a little bit like learning how to play the guitar, right? You learn the basic concepts of that, and then you have real world application to what it means, how it is used, and you know exactly what to do. And that's why I like that symbol in particular. I find that the Odinic myths, this is just my personal opinion and my personal bias, just to be fair, it is my bias. I find them to be a lot more user-friendly than Freemasonry or some of these other ones, just because there's just a lot. It feels more grounded, more down to earth for me personally. However, that's not to say that, the Freemasons don't have good stuff going on, because they freaking do. It is really fascinating. Like this book isn't very expensive. This one here, and it's not a hard read either. I mean, it's just, it's probably only 100 pages. Let's see. I'm not a very fast reader, so it takes me 100 pages is a long time for me to read. Looks like 88 pages. 90 pages. It's 90 pages. But this is packed full of really good information if you're interested, and it's called The Craft and Its Symbols. But again, I find that the Odinic myths are a lot more user-friendly than some of the other ones. So yeah, I hope this wasn't too wild, and maybe I'll get some blowback from this video. I don't know. It doesn't. If I do, it's not a big deal. But that's just kind of. Sometimes you gotta tell the truth, and my crowd's pretty cool anyway. We don't have too much religious zealotry in the truther community for the most part. So it's good to. I like my people. We have good people here. Let's see. Was there anything else? I don't remember. I think that must be it. All right. I love you all. Thank you so much for joining me today. And be safe out there. Again, we're in the season of sacrifice. Just be mindful of your surroundings. Keep an extra close watch on your kids, and you'll be fine. And ice to the skies, you guys. Gods are coming back. It's going to be a wild ride. We're in for a treat. Don't be afraid of the chaos. It's a good thing. It feels bad. Birthing pains are uncomfortable, but there's something beautiful that comes at the end of it, always. Right. The frost giants are not necessarily just evil. All right? You understand? Awesome. All right. Stay balanced out there. Ice to the skies, my friends. Bye-bye.